Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into this video. I'm going to be going through and talking to you exactly how to get good at Combat Medic. There's a lot of different ways to get good at Combat Medic, and it's something that I want to go deep on in this video. Keep in mind, however, that whilst I'm going to be in this entire video talking about how to become the best medic possible, get a bunch of kills, and be really annoying to your opposition, there is an argument to be made that during ops, during that 5% of the time where you're playing in an organised platoon or organised squad, you want to be playing a lot more passive, especially in point hold scenarios, and just be focused on rezzing someone. Someone that's really good at rezzing and has a lot of revives is, to be honest, going to be a lot more useful than someone that puts themselves in harm's way in order to get kills, but in the meantime may be dying a bit more. And so playing a bit more safe and just focusing on revives generally is recommended during ops. But for the other 95% of the time, when you're not in ops, this is what this video is for specifically. So obviously Nano Weave is no longer in a situation where it's at all viable. Nobody should be running Nano Weave anymore. And so that does free up one slot initially, and that's the suit slot. I want to kind of nail some things down as kind of defaults that you should always use though. Obviously revive grenades are 99% of the time going to be one of those things. I have seen one outfit in specific with like 6 really good players of like 2.5 KD salty heavies run around with healing grenade and carapace, I think, and there's been some limited, very small amount of success from that, but I don't really rate it that useful. So for 99.9% of times, revive grenade is going to be best. So we can just flat out say that right off the bat. Likewise, I'm going to recommend everyone run Nano Regen device. I've tried to run shield recharging field at different times whilst I've been playing medic, and I've always noticed that the shield recharging device gets shot really easily, blown up really easily, and simply it doesn't last that long during those situations where you really need it during the last 1 minute of a point hold. But I guess if you're playing Zargi, the shield recharging field can work. Mending field, again, I don't really recommend. I also don't think it offers that many SARTs if that's what you're looking for. So for most people, I'd recommend Nano Regen device. It just offers a lot more utility. I also want to entirely discount people using triage unless you're on an NSO Javelin, at which point during point hold scenarios, triage can offer some AoE heal utility, but it's really not that massive, so I really would actually, to be honest, rather have someone running around reviving people than someone on a Javelin with triage. Now for your utility slot, there's a tiny bit of nuance there, and that is that C4 is generally recommended, but truthfully, if you're going to be running around with carapace, medkit can be a good alternative. Likewise, instead of C4, if you are looking to be a bit more selfish, or if you're not in a point hold situation, running auxiliary shield is surprisingly useful and can actually offer a lot of utility because you get essentially 5% extra HP, and that's just really useful because medic isn't really that strong of a class, and so having that extra 5% HP is actually really useful. And of course you can naturally regen via your nano recharging device. Now for suit slot, there's a lot of different options depending on what you're going to be doing. For example, if you are playing a more selfish role, you're in, say, you're farming a tower, you've got sensor shield and avoidance or sweeper HUD. Something like advanced shield capacitor in combination with that auxiliary shield can actually offer some additional utility. But for most people, most of the time, something like adrenaline pump would actually work better even in that selfish scenario. And so adrenaline pump is also just very good in general because it allows you to strafe a lot more, it allows you to abuse movement, allows you to have peeker's advantage, and it allows you to disengage when you want to. So just in general, adrenaline pump is really good in medic and extremely underrated. Of course, alternatively, especially during those point hold scenarios, something like flak grenades or grenade bandolier is almost mandatory. Those two are really useful. Nano Regen Capacitor has some limited viability because it essentially makes your heal last longer or regenerate faster, however you want to think about it. But for me, that's not really something super useful. I haven't found a massive amount of utility in that relative to running flak or grenade bandolier in those point hold scenarios. Both are good viable options. Personally, I would rather the medic stay out of trouble out of harm's way and be one of the last people to die, and just be running around with revive grenades because that has so much extra utility for the team. That's just my opinion. On medic, of course, I do want to mention at this point, when you're using your revive grenades, please try to not use any of those expendables until the last 1 minute 30 of the point hold, maybe even the last 1 minute, because if you use them too early, you're just going to then be entirely shooting yourself in the foot. And of course the same goes for C4, you shouldn't be using your utility things that you can't regenerate too early. Now I'm pretty sure that's everything you need to know other than implants for the classes of medic. But there is also, of course, the implants, which does add an extra layer of complexity to combat medic because of the entirely diverse amount of different implants you can have. For example, if you are going to be playing selfish, something like Sensor Shield is really useful because it means that you can be out of position and kind of play solo a bit more, which definitely is something you can do as medic, especially if you've got a good infantry skill. Now I'm also going to be a bit controversial here and say that Assimilate maybe doesn't have as much utility relative to on heavy assault and could arguably be considered not worth it because of the amount of different implants that you can get on combat medic. Essentially, medic only has 30 ammo in an ammo pool. I guess if you're on TR you get 40. So maybe on TR Assimilate's more arguably worth it, but yeah, like the uptime of medic just isn't that high, you have to reload after 2 kills. And so because you're not going to be chain killing 3 or 4 people, arguably Assimilate for that reason alone isn't as useful. It still obviously does have some utility, but it isn't something that is your bread and butter in the same way as it is for heavy assault. There's of course other implants that are extremely strong on medic. I've kind of alluded to one earlier, and that is Carapace. Carapace is very strong with medkit. It essentially increases your effective HP from 1000 to maybe as much as 1200, depending on how long the engagement lasts. It sometimes means that you can get your shields, in quotation marks, back quicker, and so if you both end up being on 500 HP, you might be able to re-engage the opposition before they have a chance to regenerate their shields, which will happen more often than you think, and that definitely is useful. When you are running Carapace, some people do like to run Combat Sergeant because that has 2 uses. Of course, the first one being that you regenerate your heal ability quicker, which is useful. But on top of that, you also do get the damage resist bonus as well, which does basically add in a free nano weave before it got removed. Now interestingly, you don't only get this damage resistance from taking out the opposition, but you also get it from reviving your allies. Now there's a few other implants which definitely could be considered meta for the class. Things like Scavenger, which Rel added into the game and is one of probably the best implant that's been added in the last few years, I would argue, is very, very useful, especially in point hold scenarios. Essentially, Scavenger allows you to get full ammo back every single time you die, and that is so useful. Now if you are in a point hold and you have Grenade Bandolier with Resonades, you may also benefit from Response Jacket, because that will provide you with additional capability to sustain those grenades coming in, the C4 that comes in, and that of course is inevitable, and it does help a little bit to have Response Jacket. Of course Ordnance Dampener does also help, but it kind of disappears pretty quickly. I'm not a big fan of it. There is also another interesting combat medic loadout that I'm sure nobody in this video has ever heard of, or almost nobody, and that is running around with Bionics. Then you also run around with Shield Recharging Field, and then to top it off you also have Advanced Shield Capacitor. And so you can see how all 3 of those in combination, especially if you also have the Auxiliary Shield, can really offer a lot of extra effective HP and instant regeneration without having to rely on nanites. And that definitely has some utility in those fights where you're low on nanites especially. Now there's a lot of other implants that I would consider. Some of them I'll run myself, but I won't recommend them to other people. For example, things like Sensor Shield and Avoidance, both are really good implants, especially together, but really, you, as a medic, ideally you want to be with allies because that's where you get a lot of the utility of the class from. And so I'm going to say that yeah, you can run around with Sensor Shield and Avoidance and play it more like a Heavy Assault. And at that point you may as well be playing Heavy Assault, to be honest, but there is some argument against that. And that is that some of the guns on the medic have a lower time to kill than the Heavy Assault guns. For example, the HV45. If you're not going to be running around with Adrenaline Pump, you can use Athlete instead. It doesn't really hit the same, to be honest, but definitely Athlete is something you can consider if you want to. People also used to recommend Cat-like because you could essentially like glitch out the game by crouching a bunch, but these days they basically fixed that bug, so Cat-like isn't really considered meta at all anymore. There's also something like Experimental Stims, which again isn't really that useful. Things like Fortify make no sense because you want to be running around reviving people as a medic, so Fortify doesn't really have much utility. You also do have Regeneration in combination with Carapace that you can try out. It's not super strong, but it definitely is something that some people prefer. Safeguard is something people used to use more than they currently do. I feel like it kind of fell out of favour because point holding kind of fell out of favour a bit. It's still a very good implant, especially with it reducing the amount of damage that you take by 20%. That is strong. But of course at that point, you could argue that Carapace is better because you can just get rezzed on full HP. But yeah, Safeguard's definitely still something strong, I just don't see people running it that often. Survivalist used to be useful until Rel entirely basically made it not that useful. Arguably with Bionics and all that, Survivalist can be useful, I guess. You may also see some old guides recommend Symbiote, and that's because Symbiote used to be really strong until again Rel nerfed it into a point where it's essentially useless. Sweeper HUD on Medic actually isn't that bad if you're in like a tower farm scenario and you don't have Avoidance unlocked. Because of the time to kill in this game being quite high, I'm going to say something a bit controversial, and that is that shooting in general in medium range and long range generally isn't that worth it. Medium range sometimes is, to be fair, but especially long range, and so having guns that shoot at good distances isn't necessarily that useful a lot of the time. It does have some situational use, but it's just something to keep in mind when you're picking which gun to use. It doesn't have to be something that's always going to be good at medium range or long range, so something like a HV45 or something like a Serpent can be a lot better in those close range scenarios where they're needed. Now of course, don't forget to go into your ability slot and make sure that you have your nano regen device maxed out. And of course, maxing your medic tool is super useful because it does allow you to revive a lot more people a lot more quick, and that is very often very useful. If I was to main any class these days, I think going forward I'm probably going to start maining medic and maybe CQC Infiltrator a lot more relative to Heavy Assault, because I feel like this game has a lot to offer, and medic is one of those classes that has so much different areas in which it's good that just people don't really use. Instead, a lot of people just play Heavy Assault. And recently, in the last few days, me running around with Medic in non-point hold scenarios has been actually pretty fun, and it's something I'm going to try to do more often. Now, I am interested in hearing, what do you think I should have said in this guide? Is there anything you would have said that I haven't? Is there any additional tips that you've got for combat medic players? Oh, by the way, this channel is exclusively about Planetside. And there's only one video posted every 3 days, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of those videos. It'll help make sure that the algorithm knows you're interested in Planetside content if you're subscribed. And of course, liking the video helps as well. Hope you'll have a wonderful day. I'm out. GG. Bye bye.